Really now thinks that the Catholic Church has any moral right to tell a politician that they'll be denied the sacraments if they don't conform. I mean, I'd like to see them try it again. I really do. Would like to see that.
Well,
that would once have been a very dreadful threat.
To move it outside this country, let me just ask you, given the Huntington thesis, all these ideas about clash of civilizations, what do you think? Do you think these are wars of religion? Or are they wars, as many wars of religion have done, wars which use religion as a cloak for other discontents?
Well, I'm sure it's both, and there's a lot of the latter. I mean, remember that the Crusades, which the Muslim world goes on about a lot, and quite understandably, began with a huge pogrom against European Jewry. Mm-hmm. Then when they more or less finished that, nearly finished it, they moved across the Bosphorus, or not across, but to the Bosphorus, and destroyed Byzantine Eastern Orthodox Christianity, which they thought of as a heresy and an anathema. So before they even got to Jerusalem and started butchering the Muslims, they'd settled accounts with the Jews and with the only other papacy, the only other Christian rival, excuse me, in the picture. So I think Sir Stephen Runciman is probably quite right to say that at that point, the Crusades were the most retarding experience that human civilization had ever undergone, and we're still suffering from the consequences. It was an intra-Christian war that led to the Crusades. Likewise, as you can see in Iraq and elsewhere, there's at least one civil war within Islam between the Sunni and the Shia, against Ahmadi Muslims, for example, who are considered heretical, especially in Pakistan, against Sufism. It's becoming a warlord religion almost, Islam, because there are dueling fatwas issued by separate authorities, unluckily for them in some ways and for us. They don't have a pope who can put a unified line everyone has to follow. There are various centers of power. And often they want to settle these disputes on non-Muslim soil. I mean, after all, no Sunni government ever supported the fatwa against you, I think.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. Well, I mean, it was no government at all, actually, other than that of Iran. And that was partly for political reasons, because actually when the protests against the Satanic Verses began, they were largely financed by Saudi Arabia. And the Iranian fatwa actually hijacked a Saudi campaign, thus enormously pissing off Saudi Arabia. And it's one of the reasons...
No one outbids the Ayatollah.
Yeah. No, well, I mean, I just would like to point out in regard to me and the Ayatollah Khomeini that, one of us is dead.
Yes.
Do not mess with novelists.
Yes. Litera scripta manet, the written word will remain.
And it's true that if you look at the Muslim world, the political, apart from the Sunni-Shia split, the political dissensions are so profound that it's very difficult to speak of a jihad.
Yes.
The Afghans hate the Iranians, who hate the Saudis, who hate the Syrians, so on. So it's clearly not unified. But on the other hand, there clearly has grown up something which is of appeal to, it may be a small group, but a dangerous group, where the idea of the pan-global jihad has become very attractive.
Yes.
And what do you think that's about?
I mean, it's very noticeable, for example, I shouldn't prejudge their case, but I don't like the look of it. The 4 Pakistani boys who left a suburb of my hometown the other day and turned up in the wrong camp in Pakistan are only the latest in a large number of young men from England, from France, elsewhere, who've volunteered to go die in remote parts of the Muslim world. Now, it's interesting, isn't it? It always has to be they want to go work with Al-Qaeda or the Taliban. Why wouldn't a young Muslim in London before 2001 have wanted to go and fight with the Northern Alliance in Afghanistan, which was as Muslim an organization as could be, had fought against the Soviet Union, was opposed to the Taliban, had probably had more support than it did. No one goes to volunteer for that. No one went to volunteer for the Kurdish people who were fighting against Saddam Hussein, just as Muslim. All the Muslim activists took the side of Saddam Hussein when it came to the crunch in the war, who himself enjoyed the support of Al-Qaeda. if not in a military operational sense, he had the sympathy of their proclamations. In some horrible way, it's thought that you're an Uncle Tom if you're any other kind of Muslim.
Yeah.
That the authentic stuff has to be the most horrible, the most extreme, and the most completely consecrated to violence, that consecration being sealed by self-destruction, suicide. So that it really is a battle for what you could call the soul of Islam.
I sometimes think, I wondered what you think about this, that in the way that Soviet communism, Soviet-style communism, kind of burned through a large part of the world and then burned out, there's an argument which says that in those countries where radical Islam has become most powerful, it is also most disliked. That's to say, the people of Afghanistan, a very large majority of them do not like the Taliban. A very large majority of the population of Iran does not like the rule of the Ayatollahs. Sure. The people of Algeria who flirted with the feasts of the GIA very rapidly moved away from them.
Iraq? Iraq has totally isolated the Al-Qaeda.
So here's an argument, which is that here's a rhetoric which appears to be very attractive, kind of sexy, glamorous, particularly to young men without much hope of a future. And it can burn into a society with great speed, but then very rapidly people come to discover that they hate it.
Yes.
So what do you think of that idea that this may be a short-lived phenomenon?
By the way, I think you're obviously right. I mean, there's every sign of a turn of that kind among the people of Somalia now, as well against the so-called Shabab, many of whom are foreign volunteers, quite a lot of them Americans. And yes, no one who's ever tried it once wants to try it again. That's absolutely true. But it's a lot to go through. And it can Afghanistan will take a long, long time to recover.
Yes.
Just from a fairly brief period of Taliban rule. It's not very difficult to diagnose either. I mean, after all, if you forbid yourself the talents of 50% of the population to start with, that's before you do anything else, then you ban music, then you ban all books that aren't the Quran, the floor is going to keep on dropping. It takes a long time to bring it back up to where it was. So if you mean, might we just let them burn themselves out? I don't think you were saying anything as callous as that, but if you think, well, could we sit it out in some... I mean, I sometimes think perhaps not, because the damage done is so great. And the problem with it, as with all theocracies, is it doesn't have a self-critical capacity. If they look around and they notice, okay, all the children's teeth are falling out. Nothing works here except the secret police. In the fields, nothing really grows except footprints. What have we been doing wrong? What they'll say is, we haven't been doing anything wrong. We just maybe haven't been praying hard enough. And in the meantime, the Crusader Zionist conspiracy has been at work to subvert our country. Yeah. So, of the huge number of failed and unemployed and unemployable young men they've got, they try to export them. They export the violence back to the West. So that we have every interest in not just stopping the jihadist element, but in stopping the terrible underdevelopment that Islamism brings. I mean, just to say it this way, very often you read people, quite smart people, saying, well, these people are the product of poverty and unemployment. So you've heard it. No, they're not. They're the cause of poverty and unemployment. No society they've ever had any control over has not been immediately more poor and with much less employment. The national income of Indonesia was reduced by a whole point by the attacks of Al-Qaeda on Bali, for example. They drove many people into poverty and unemployment. That's their plan. But don't fool yourself that it's a protest against bad conditions. It's a wish for them.
At the height of the Soviet Union, a lot of non-Soviet socialist voices in Europe and America, around the world, made a distinction between what they saw as the distortions of the Soviet system and what they called actually existing communism, which was clearly cruel and despotic and so on and so on, and if you like, true socialism.
Yes.
The true church of Karl Marx, which was virtuous. It seems to me now that there's often a similar argument being made people who wish to distinguish themselves from